All right, Taylor Stein.
Here we are.
Oh my God.
It's happening.
I have so many questions for you. First of all, I mean, like, you got a story. You got a lot of stories. You have so many stories. I have an opening question to you, but I just have to say, like, from the nightclub to the Yankees to Magnificent Burden, which is this documentary you made about child trafficking and adopting your son. I mean, like, you have really lived a life. You've lived multiple lifetimes in one life. So what I want to ask you, though, is when did you know that you were a kind of disruptor? That you were not going to live by the status quo?
Okay, that is a very good question. I think like most disruptors, well, for me at least, it wasn't a choice, right? I was a really angry kid. And I have to say that I think I devolved before I evolved. And so it was that evolution of being complex, being angry, being sad, that brought me to this place where I realized that, you know, I had to turn that energy into something else. And that was when, you know, unfortunately it happened later in life than I would have liked. But once I figured out that that was a gift and there was power in that and I wasn't a victim, I sort of flipped the switch on it.
Yeah, you've had like a 17, almost double decade like experience career in consciousness as a consciousness practitioner. But I wonder though, is it relevant to talk a little bit about the party days, about how you had to go like get
Sure, that's the
down?
journey. In my case, that's the journey.
Yeah.
And fortunately for some people, they don't have to start at the bottom.
Right.
I did.
Yeah.
Right. So life in New York was challenging for me as a child. I grew up in a very, I hate the word traumatic, but a very unique life. My father was a nightclub impresario. I ended up working in that business for years and went to boarding school very young, very confused, dabbled in anything imaginable. And it was all important. Like, I don't look back on any of it with regret. I actually look back on it with gratitude.
Yeah. What were you like in those, because I actually want to fast forward a little bit, but I want to ask this question first. Like, what were you thinking, feeling, trying to experience in those moments? Were you just like feeling yourself? Were you just like, I'm playing the bad girl role? Like,
playing the bad girl role and thinking it was cool, right? Like, you have to attach an identity to it, right? It has to be cool. Otherwise, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to be doing what's really cool, which is studying and getting your shit together and focusing on the things that are going to be important in life. Yeah. But so my identity became that bad girl.
Yeah.
And I played it really well for a really long time. And then you start to build walls, and it's like anything else, right? Like, you act as if, and then you become. Your thoughts create your reality.
Yeah. So you're New York's number one socialite. You have your own restaurant. You're working the whole city, and then what? Life falls apart, and you end up here in LA. Tell us what happens.
Well, like every illusion, it falls apart unless you create it as a reality. So for me, it was an illusion. I think my friends would disagree with the fact that I was the number one socialite in New York, but for all intents and purposes,
voted, so
I was, right? But I would say that, I lost my restaurant. My rent went from $40,000 a month to $90,000, and I couldn't afford it. It turned out that I was giving a lot away. I thought I was a Rockefeller, behind the reins, and I wasn't. I had to pay my bills. And so I lost the restaurant, and with it, my identity. Mm-hmm. And it's a really lonely place, right? You're lost, and you have no idea who you are. You're in your 30s. So what do you have to do, right? You have to look inside.
Yeah. And that's what brought you sort of out to Los Angeles. You have a daughter, and this is where, as I understand it, your consciousness journey begins.
This is where the shift takes place.
Yeah,
I'm in Los Angeles alone. I have very few friends. My father had died, and I didn't know where to go. Mm-hmm. I had unraveled. I was a shell of the woman I am right now. And by the way, I say this all with gratitude because I did not want to age as that person.
Totally.
Right? Yeah. So I found my way to Kundalini. I found my way to the Golden Bridge. And that was my first stop.
Got it.
And sort of similar to your story, as soon as I entered those rooms, I felt like I belonged.
Yeah.
And look, when you suffer, you're always more likely to be to be aware of the fact that there's something bigger and you don't have it, right? So I was a big seeker and I knew that there was more. I wanted it and I couldn't grasp it. And when I walked into those rooms, first of all, you can't be in a room with 150 practitioners and not feel that energy.
Totally.
And not feel that what that teacher is offering you is tangible. It's within your reach. So it was only a few classes in that I started to see a shift. I was going through a really hard time. So to see a shift was really difficult.
Yeah.
And it started slowly. Like you leave class, you feel great for about half an hour, 30 minutes.
Right.
And then it builds and you start to realize like it started taking longer for me to get to my base. And it felt great.
Yeah.
I was energized. So I knew I had a path. But, you know, part of the reason people don't jump into meditation is, A, it's not easy, right? The people who need it most are reluctant. Yeah. It's not easy. It's time consuming and it's a journey, right? You can't, getting to that place in meditation that you talk about where the DMT starts to release, that's an old practitioner.
Yeah.
Right? You're lucky if that happens in the first couple of years. So, but I knew it was there.
Yeah.
And I knew I had access to it. And one or two great meditations where you really feel like you're in touch with the universe and you're at one and there's no fight and you don't have to build those walls, you let them down. One or two of those experiences and you're hooked.
Yeah.
And totally. You know that you're on a different path. And you look back and you're like, wow, how did I go so far off my center? And I want to be back. Yeah. I want to go back to that original spot.
It's so funny because I never think, I know you in this, it's so funny that in one way it's like, oh, it's so funny that we both practice Kundalini yoga. In another way, it's not. That's how we met.
Of course.
But I never think of you in that way. I always think of you as this human being who's just like, who's gotta have life this time and who's going to hunt for life, by hook or by crook, come hell or high water. Like you're a warrior. So when we don't have practices or skills, we'll do we'll do whatever it takes.
Of course,
to feel
we have
alive.
no outlet.
Yeah,
correct. And that's where the risk factor comes in, right?
Yeah,
you're not getting it from the good and the powerful and the energetic, so you'll get it from the risk. Like right. I was jumping out of airplanes every weekend. I was doing anything. I was a thrill seeker because the thrill within hadn't showed itself to me yet.
Yeah.
And so to me, I've always been a believer, in incarnations. And at some point I started realizing like, I'm not living this one the right way. Right? I'm taking up a lot of time, like life is valuable. I manifested it and I'm throwing it away. Wow. Right? And there's nothing worse. Wow. Right? There's nothing worse than knowing that you have so much. And I've always known that I had that kind of magnetism that could bring things to me, right? Yeah. Everything I've done, I've been uber successful. Yeah. Well, not relationships, but like we all have a downside. Yeah. But in terms of what I was able to bring in or manifest, I knew I had power.
Yeah.
So I was selling myself short.
Yeah.
And it was a really shitty feeling.
Yeah.
And how do you change that? Well, A, you find great teachers.
Right. You
find a great practice. You dig deep, and you try to find your blind spots. And I had a lot of them. They were all over me. I was driving like an 18-wheeler, and there were a bunch of Porsches around me, and I couldn't see them.
Yeah, or I even feel like you were the like Tesla Porsche hybrid like future where you're driving just like so fast. You've got such an amazing vehicle, but because you're driving so fast, like the blind spots aren't always available to you.
Right. And the vehicle was a little bit of a mess.
Yeah.
So I had to put it back together. And by the way that things came together, and I really want people to understand this, it's those rough moments. It's those times where you're about to give up. The times it's so painful you just can't even face it anymore. And that was my superpower. Wow. I was great in those horrible moments. And there were so many of them that I just built upon them. And so thank God for moving here and being alone. Thank God for my restaurant having to be sold. Thank God for every time I lost my old identity, I shed it. I didn't lose it, I shed it.
Yeah.
Because something greater was underneath, right?
Yeah.
And so here I am, continuing to try to grow, grasping onto anything. Many of my friends are like you. Most of the people in my life teach me something about myself. It's that reflection.
Yeah. Totally.
It's that reflection. Yeah. And I'm attracted to that. Yeah. And I'm also attracted to people that are smarter and more interesting. And there are tons of those.
Totally. Well, you're a very open person, and also you're amazing. I want to talk about, we're in LA, we're doing the Kundalini, and then Magnificent Burden.
Yes. Okay, so this was many turning points. Moving to LA, my breakup was very painful. I wasn't really able to be a completely focused mother, which is one of my regrets. I don't have many regrets. I would say that's one, although she's turned out very well.
Fabulously.
Thank you. Yeah. So I adopted a little boy because I wanted my daughter to have a sibling, and growing up sort of a lonely child, I'd always thought that I would be a great parent to an adopted child. So I adopted a little boy, and 2 weeks before he was born, the FBI turn up at my doorstep, and they tell me that I've been the victim of an international fraud, and that my baby was actually a black market baby.
Wow.
Which is not what I thought. I thought I was taking over a surrogacy that had gone awry.
Got it.
When in fact, this company was taking American women, sending them to Ukraine, Greece, impregnating them with random embryos, bringing the surrogate back to the U.S. Once they realized she was pregnant, they would call people like me that were desperate and ask if they wanted to take over a surrogacy, because the original intended parents had gotten pregnant on their own. All of it, felonious, but when you're desperate for something, you believe what you want to believe, right? And my intuition had always been good, but it wasn't as elevated as it has become after the practice. Yeah. So I fell for it, and I adopted this baby, and then the FBI asked me if I would go undercover with them, and I did. Oh, my God. And in fact, we actually busted the ring of women that were doing this, and I was able to adopt my son legally. But this was still sort of the Wild West of surrogacy. Gay marriage had just been legalized. So, but you still had to go to Baltimore or I believe Vegas to have a surrogacy done. So things have, the landscape has changed drastically.
Yeah.
So that was the first. I thought that was going to be my cross to bear, like dealing with adopted kids. And I really believe in open adoption, and that parents shouldn't be able to lie to their children and tell them, that they're not divulge. Like, we're all about transparency, right? This is the age of transparency. So a year into my son, when my son turned a year, I realized that he had a potentially terminal illness that he had inherited from these two biological parents that didn't know each other. So the odds, again, were 1 in 60 million. That was the number I was given. And that the chances of my child ever reaching adulthood or ever eating on his own without a feeding tube or standing on his own were very unlikely. So this took me to a different level, because when we're talking about health and the health of one's child, it's a very different.
Absolutely, right? That's an instinct that kicks in. Yeah.
So I really needed help. Yeah. And while I was going to the yoga every day, which of course did help, I needed something. I needed something to get me a little deeper and a little faster. I needed something to launch me, right?
Yeah.
So this is when I started my work with the psychedelics.
Yeah.
And at that point, the Kundalinis didn't look fondly of it. Now, they've grown. We've all grown, right?
For sure.
There's a whole. The more we learn, the more we know. The more we see, and the proof is in the pudding. Someone who's been impacted negatively, and they start working with these medicines, and then you see the change is relatively quick, like it is with Kundalini. So I think the whole landscape of Kundalini has changed. We're all growing at an enormously quick rate.
Absolutely. And I also think this is something you said to me once before as well. I think a lot of the discouragement against overuse of the psychotropics comes from where you can go into a sort of, I don't want to say abusive state around it.
No, the plants don't like it.
The plants don't, that's what you said.
Take advantage.
You said the plants don't like it.
And you stop getting messages. You essentially stop getting messages if you abuse. Mm-hmm. So my first journey, my son, now I'm mired in victimhood. Right. Why did this happen to me? And we all know where victimhood gets you, right? Nowhere. I'm mired in victimhood. How could this happen to me? How am I going to live the rest of my life? My poor son. So I started working with the plant medicine, and I think it was my first or second journey. Now, these are flood journeys. Like, they're not to be taken lightly. They're not to be done unless you're in the care of somebody who knows how to hold space properly. But I saw what's called a pre-life contract. Now, do you know what those are?
Of course.
Right, of course you do. So I'm going to explain to those who don't know. So for those of us who believe in incarnations, a lot of us I believe, that we choose our family. We choose who our parents are, we choose who our friend group is, and we take them through various lifetimes with us. Just like we do on our day-to-day life, right? We have our core group. So I was in the middle of this really intense journey, and I was having a conversation with my son before he was born and before I was born.
Wow.
And the conversation was essentially, look, I'm coming to you as a mother because I need to heal this aspect of me. I mean, it's all karmic, right? Who knows what Ren and I had done in our past lives to end up having to heal each other.
Yeah.
But this was a real eye-opener because this was no joke. I mean, this was karma in your face.
Yeah.
And I saw my son, and we were having this conversation about how he was going to choose me because I had characteristics and elements in me that would heal what he needed to heal. Mm-hmm. And he was going to bring to me this experience, which was unfathomable. I was going to have a very sick son. And how was I going to cope with it? So I was, a spoiled brat. Like I was not, yes, I was studying Kundalini, but at this point, only for 10 years. I had a lifetime of mishaps and bad judgment and, freewheeling.
Yeah.
And so it all came down to this moment where I realized that my son came to me to heal me. He was my healer.
Yeah.
And I was there to heal him.
Yeah.
And together we were going to create something beautiful. Yeah. And that was no joke because we got him into a program, a medical program. And I don't know if you know anything about medical trials, but like they rarely pass. Mm. He became the face of this medicine that has essentially cured children with his disease, which is spinal muscular atrophy. Mm-hmm. Children who were, on feeding tubes and living in wheelchairs can now walk. They roam freely. Some of them it's undetectable. Unfortunately, my son didn't get the medication till he was 2, so he walks with crutches. But our lives are so much more beautiful. They're so much more profound. Everything matters, right? We don't take 1 second for granted. Yeah. And I think you can feel it when you walk into our house. That this house has a very calming, sort of loving vibe because we won't tolerate the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
I won't tolerate it.
We were at a meal once and somebody said, there is always love in this house. And it really it broke my heart open because I was like, it's So true. There is really always love in this house.
And your kids come and bring it, right? Like these new age kids, man, there's nothing like them. They are such an upgrade from where we were. And it's so beautiful. Like, you're like, I created that? Like, holy cow. Yeah. And it's such a blessing because they don't have to go through the muck and mire that we went through, right? They're sort of already there.
Yeah.
They know what self-love is. Like, unfortunately, we weren't raised understanding the even concept. So the conceptualization of self-love is so out there. Not for them.
Totally.
Like, Juno would come home and say to me, like, Mom, I had a moment of self-love today. And I'm like, good girl.
It's amazing. Yeah, right? It's incredible.
And Dusty
oh, gosh, she's so like that. Yeah, no, that's amazing. So, wow, I think I knew a lot of pieces of that story about you and Ren, but I don't think I knew all of those pieces, and especially that part about the journey and the pre-life contract. And I think this is like both hilarious, but also very real, like these karma chameleons. And part of the disclosure that I am excited to do in the Nod podcast, which is start to open normalize for people these experiences that they might be having, but maybe like they're not hearing anybody else talk about it. Absolutely. And here you're having like a real time, real life, like, karma. We're here together. We have a pre-life contract for soul growth. And because you were always this deep, this rich, this beautiful, this strong, but it takes these moments to really catalyze.
Absolutely.
One can never say how intense the moment needs to be.
I think when you and I were discussing doing a podcast, right? Yeah. One of the questions we both asked each other is why.
Yeah.
And at the core, we're both teachers.
Yeah.
Right? We're both teachers. We're always going to be students of life. I hope, right? Yeah. That's what you want. You want a student. But we're also teachers. Yeah. And we wanted to show people really what life could look like if you start to manifest and create and mold, right? Yeah. So your thoughts become your reality. Like, how do you stop that negative talk? Mm-hmm. How do you create positive thoughts? And how do you elevate your frequency? Like, these, by the way, these are tactics. These are Kundalini teachings.
And we're both teachers, we're both practitioners, and we're interested in showcasing a variety of tools, a variety of modalities, a variety of perspectives, all the different ways that you can approach life,
and healing.
We're
all broken, right? Exactly. That famous, I don't know if it was originally Hemingway or Rumi, there's so many people that it's attributed to, but light comes in through the womb.
Yeah, exactly.
And it does.
Like Leonard Cohen, Rumi.
Did he write it?
We don't know. Leonard Cohen. One of the greats. Yeah, no, absolutely. And also that, like, just like there's an infinite, because there's an infinite, there's not an infinite number of people. There's 9 billion, 8 billion, something like that on the planet. There's that many ways to approach life. There's that many perspectives. There's that many unique engagements with it all. And us talk, that's what we want to do with this podcast. I want you to tell us a little bit more about just you as a psychonaut, what your perspective with that is, what your relationship to that is, how it's helped you, how, you mentioned something about we won't call it moderation, but just like sensitivity to the relationship with the substance, the plant, because of what happens when you're not sensitive.
So I am a very big advocate for plant medicine if you feel called to it, right? If you don't feel called to it, I don't suggest you indulge, because it can be a very trying experience, right? Because you have to go through that dark tunnel, right? And so part of what I really love about plant medicine, because I had been on SRIs, I've been on SRIs,
serotonin inhibitors,
right?
Yeah,
I've been for anybody who doesn't therapists, and sort of what this was doing was sort of just carving deeper, engraving my belief system that I was trapped. And so I would, you talk about it, so you become it. You think about it, you become it, and I just couldn't get out. So I believe that a lot of this trauma and a lot of this pain is actually lodged in our DNA. And what's so important about these plant medicines is that because it's experiential, you're not talking about it. You're actually reliving it, hence the pain.
Right.
But once you're through it, it's released. It's released from your system. It's released from your DNA. And suddenly you can breathe again.
Yeah.
Now, again, when you say the abuses of it,
or maybe misuses is a better word.
Either or.
I don't know.
Like, I mean, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, right? So for me, it was a bridge.
Yeah.
Right? It was something to help get it out of my DNA, release it from my body. And the way that you know this happens is that your trips start to get less dark. Right? You see, like you first go in and you're petrified because you're like, oh my God, I've got to look at my past and all the shit I've done. That trip is never good, right? You're going in with that frame of mind. You got to get through it. So there's always a lot of crying. There's a lot of purging. And this, again, is why like doesn't appeal to everybody because a lot of people are throwing up. You know, your body is literally purging these expressions of pain.
Did you do your trips in private or were you with a group?
Well, I started off doing it in a group.
Okay.
And I had a few charlatans, but what was so amazing about the charlatans, it didn't really matter because the plant medicine overrode the charlatan.
Right.
The teacher, or whoever's in the room holding space, they just have to be of a high frequency. They're not teaching you.
Right.
The good ones, shut up and let the plant medicine do its work, I think. So for me, I started off doing them in groups. But then I realized that my mind and my 10th gate or my
crown chakra
was opening so much, I didn't want anything that anyone else was releasing coming in.
Yeah.
There were people in the rooms who hadn't done the work, and we weren't on the same frequency. I just didn't want their stuff coming in. So one of my best friends, I think she's one of the most amazing ceremony holders. She does privates for me. She'll do it for my children. I really like the private. I think it's an important way to go. That said, if a private isn't available to you, do the group. I mean, you get it one way or another. You will get the fix.
Yeah.
So there was a time that I had such bad OCD that I was essentially mutilating my body. I was scratching my arms to the point where they were bleeding. And I had to wrap them because I was embarrassed and I didn't want people to see. And, you know, big pharma, I think I was on like 5 different meds, including the SRIs. And a friend of mine had gone down to Mexico and done a very intense plant medicine called iboga or ibogaine, which is similar to ayahuasca. It's from Central Africa, whereas ayahuasca is from Central America, from South America. And this was it's really the only cure for heroin or narcotics, right?
Yeah.
But they've learned that it's working for other things, any sort of loop addiction. So I really didn't believe that I belonged on medicine. I thought it was something internal that was making me itch, right? And it was OCD. So I was told to get off the SRIs because you can't commingle. And I did that cold turkey, which I don't recommend, but I knew this was the answer.
Interesting.
I went down to Mexico. I did one ibogaine hit, which was a flood dose. It lasted for 15 hours. It wasn't particularly beautiful, but I did put myself in a trance. And the medicine still works because, again, these plants are thousands of years old, so they have their own consciousness, which is why I prefer the actual plant medicine to the now synthetic versions,
Right.
which can be cleaner, by the way. They don't have the same consciousness.
Totally.
So,
well, they don't have the same constituents as the plant. And like, we're just, I mean, I don't know. This is a really interesting thing that we can talk about on a different episode, I think, just about like this merger of the technological age and also this time where like I think most people are wanting to connect more into the earth because actually as the deeper you connect in with the earth, the organic, the healthier your DNA gets.
it's scarier, though.
It is
And
scarier.
people are adverse to fear, which, by the way, without it, you don't get very far. You know what I mean? Like, if it's a battle between the weaker and the stronger, the weaker always learns the bigger lesson.
Right.
Right? So like right now, I know that they're trying to come up with psilocybin that doesn't have any scary effects. And
I see.
Basically, then you're just tripping.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Then you're just going on then you might as well go to a rave.
Right.
Because you're not getting the lessons.
Yeah.
The lessons are dark. For the most part.
Can be.
For the most part. But you certainly don't want to take anything out of the teachings.
Right.
Right? You don't want to edit the teachings.
Right.
So they suit you.
Right.
So, I did this one hit of Ibogaine, and I did it with 5 other people who were suffering in various ways. And one hit, I never scratched my arms again.
Wow.
Now, I don't do psychedelics on a regular basis anymore, right? I've got the lessons. The meditation is the Kundalini is the crux of my spiritual practice.
Yeah.
It is the foundation. I've been doing it long enough. So what's interesting about plant medicine, for those who have never meditated, it can be a bridge. It can teach you what you're looking for in meditation. That feeling of oneness, of one with the universe, of, we were talking about Avatar.
Yeah.
And how, when she's braiding her hair, that electric field is connected to the trees. And so when you're in a journey, you'll see that electricity.
Right.
You see that.
Right.
When you're in meditation, you can feel it if you get deep enough.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't know how to get there. They don't know what they're waiting for. They're just sitting there in silence.
Well, and we were also coming through, things are changing so fast, so rapidly, so expansively, but we are coming from a time where I'll say the lifestyle has been very calcifying to the pineal gland. So when you want to start to be more intuitive and more in organic rhythm with yourself and destiny and all of life, you have to decalcify that pineal gland. Plant medicine is a fast way to do that.
And we have some exercises that do that as well, but right.
Yeah.
So you decalcify and you tear down walls, right? All the things that make you vulnerable.
Right.
All the things that make you vulnerable. And vulnerability is petrifying. It's also a superpower, but if you're not used to managing it, it can be overwhelming.
Absolutely.
And I do think that spiritual enlightenment, can be scary. Sometimes you don't know what's happening. I remember my first Kundalini awakening, and I was driving, and I had to pull over to the side. And I knew what was happening. I just didn't know how to manage it.
Gosh, wow.
So it was after a Tage class.
Wow.
It was after a Tage class, and my friend was following me because we were taking Ren to the hospital, and I had it on the side of the road. I pulled over, and she pulled over with me, and I knew I was a yogi, so I knew how to breathe to get through it, and I knew how to let go. But it was, I would think to someone who hadn't been in the practice, it would have been terrifying, and to me, it was beautiful, scary but beautiful.
Yeah.
So change, growth is just as scary as those fearful moments. It's just we're growing in them.
Yeah.
And we have to learn to open the heart and let it in and trust.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely, life is so, had this thought yesterday that I was like, life is probably the most gorgeous and hardest thing. It's so exquisite. And it is so challenging.
And we choose it and we create it that way, right? The more challenging, the more exquisite.
The more exquisite, the more beautiful. It's really intense to be alive.
It's intense. And we're so grateful. Because when you think of how did we manifest this? How powerful are we that we're sitting here right now?
Yeah.
Right? And someone else isn't in this chair. It's us.
Right. No, I feel that with you all the time. It's like this is why it's so fun to be in partnership with you, because I'm like, woo! It's a really amazing flow.
It's important to surround yourself with people who live in gratitude.
It's true.
Because the the opposite is really painful. Mm-hmm. The opposite is really painful. Yeah. So you surround yourself with people, and I think that happens naturally.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I can tell you that my friends today don't look anything like they did 20 years ago.
Let me ask you this, sort of like, not in closing, but as we sort of start to come to
Wind down.
What would you, because I'm thinking about like for someone potentially starting their journey, I do think that changing your social group, losing your friends, like that can be one of the hardest things. Any words of advice around one, like how to start your journey, and two, like how to be courageous enough to change and let people.
I wish I could teach courage.
Yeah.
I don't know how teachable courage is. It's a leap. It's a leap of faith. I do think a very important aspect of this is you find someone who's doing it the way you want it to be done.
Yeah.
They look like they've got their act together. Their auric field is high. Yeah. They seem to be happier more than sad.
Right.
And attach yourself to that person.
Yeah.
And listen to their lessons.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say generally it's someone older than you, but not anymore, right? Not anymore. These kids are popping out and they're so advanced.
Yeah.
But, I think reading. You know who's a great, there's several authors that I think are really great beginner authors. I think Joe Dispenza is a great beginner author.
Totally.
I think he's good. I don't go to his forums, but I read his books and they were powerful. Eckhart Tolle's a great one.
Totally.
To get you into poets. Rumi's obviously a great one.
Yeah.
Anyone who makes you feel like there's something else there that you haven't been able to tap into naturally.
Yeah.
And then attach yourselves to them.
Right.
And then guess what? You start meeting people who are aligned.
Yeah. And then attach yourself, but also recognize that like they're doing it their way for them. You're an individual, you're different. Eventually you're going to have to do it your way for you, because if you simply model off of another person, that person is a totally bio-spiritual, they're totally unique.
Of course.
Yeah.
But they've got something to teach you.
Yeah.
Right? And we're talking about beginners who are easing in. Where do you get the courage? Follow someone.
Yeah.
Follow someone down their path. It's less scary, right?
Yeah.
You're walking in the woods, always better to have a buddy.
Yeah.
And then then you naturally release.
Yeah.
You naturally release.
Yeah.
Right? Like, look, I don't know if when you first started studying with your teacher, if you thought that you were going to have be your own. You were going to carry on her teachings, but you were going to diverge and do it your way. And you've modernized those teachings and you've got your own following now, right?
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. I mean, I definitely.
It's growth, right? It's all growth.
Yeah.
We take those steps as we're ready.
Yeah.
I think courage is the hardest part because that's the leap of faith. And if you don't have faith and if you feel beaten down, where do you get it? Where do you draw it from?
That's an interesting thing.
Where do you draw
it from?
I had no choice. Despair, complete despair.
Do you draw it like from your gut though?
It comes from my gut. Hold on.
Okay.
Started from the gut.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So it started from the lower chakras. Okay. The more I grow, the more I can get it from my heart.
Mm-hmm. Get courage from the heart.
The more I get courage from the heart. My intuition is very high at this point.
Mm-hmm. You do have a really strong intuition.
I have really good intuition. I'm not psychic. I do get little hits, but I'm not psychic. But I definitely have a very strong intuition. They're very different. But my intuition is advanced. And so that I let guide me now.
Yeah.
In the old days, it was my gut, and it was very lower chakra, so I was making all sorts of mistakes, but always brave.
Yeah.
Oh, it came to me naturally because I had no other way.
Yeah. No, I feel like you got to get it from the gut. You got to just you got to dig deep and find it. And I'm a big I like to self-coach. Like I like to get in the game. Like
You do. You do. You dive in.
And I'm like, get in the game. This is how it's done. So I think like for anybody who's out there, if they're wondering like, well, how do I find it? Like you got to find your inner football. You got to find your inner NFL coach.
I think you're a great teacher for people who are trying to figure out how to get in, because you really are not a Saturn teacher.
No,
you're loving and you're open and you have more of that sort of female essence.
Yeah.
And so, I think you are a great teacher for someone who's trying to leap in.
Yeah, you're a great teacher for someone who's trying to leap in. Okay, I have this question. Just like, is there anything that you want to share about the podcast, where you hope it goes, what your inspiration for it was? What do we want to do with In the Nod?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, nod is the cosmic vibration,
yeah.
right?
We never even talked
we
about
never
this.
Explained it to you. So it's a yogic term. It's not specifically a kundalini term, but it is the vibration of the cosmos. And so I think that, there were a lot of elements that came into planning this, right? One was sort of elevating the planet, elevating people's consciousness. The other one was to have was to have an arena for people who think like we do, people who are sort of out there, I would say, question everything, right? Mm-hmm. Everything is a question for us.
Totally.
Everything ends with a question mark.
Absolutely.
Right? Nothing is like, we don't
100%.
take anything at face value.
Definitely not.
Right? It's almost, I don't even know if we know how.
Question mark?
Do we know how? The answer is no.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we want to bring ideas and concepts, no matter how far out, into this community. And we want to expand the way you think. We want you to share the ideas with us too. Like,
absolutely,
anything you guys want to talk about that you think is embarrassing or you can't talk about at the Thanksgiving table, email us.
Definitely.
We are down.
100%. We are down.
We are down.
Down for the renegade, the poet, the soul lover, the psychonaut.
What do you call the crystal? The
crystal whisperers.
The crystal whisperers.
The numerologists. We are down.
Yeah, we are the outliers. But the more you get to know us, you'll realize these girls are not woo-woo. They're actually really grounded. Yeah. They're really smart. And a lot of the stuff that you've probably been thinking silently, we're going to say out loud.
Yeah.
So, you're part of our tribe. Yeah. If you're listening, you're our tribe.
Band of outsiders.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, this is such an awesome episode. I can't wait for everything that we have ahead. Stay tuned, everyone. It's going to get real.